So, good morning to all of us. Some of you are earlier than others. We have a couple of people from different time zones here, so welcome. Let's start our meeting with our blessing for learning, which is Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kiddushanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe. You sanctify us with commandments, and you command us to engage in learning in the give and take of Torah, and we hope that that give and take is productive for all of us. And today I am going to, as you can see, wow, another rabbi. Now we have a baked in with Rabbi Nori on board. Wow, this is great. And so our topic today is really Bari Weiss, who is an amazing voice on the topic of combating anti-Semitism. And her book, How to Fight Anti-Semitism, which came out a year ago, I recommend. I don't necessarily agree with all of her historical analysis of sources of anti-Semitism, which is why we're not going to talk about them, because I don't think it's the meat of her book. The meat of her book is really the multi-directional way in which anti-Semitism appears. That is, there is, here in the United States right now, there is anti-Semitism on the right, and there's anti-Semitism on the left. And in both cases, they are worrying. And recognizing that worry, recognizing that concern is worth considering. And so she has a really lovely long chapter at the end of her book about all of the ways in which we as Jews, or people who are in the Jewish sphere, as some people say, Jewish adjacent, can really work hard on this, both internally and externally. So that's option number one for today. Option number two is an article of hers from a couple of weeks ago that really got a whole lot of attention. Whether or not it was reasonable or otherwise is another story. And it's an article in Tablet Magazine, which is an online publication with a big Jewish cultural bent. And this article focuses really on the problems of liberalism in the United States right now, which is a significant concern. And specifically how anti-Semitism is becoming an ingrained, necessary idea of the left, of the American left. And she addresses this in her book, and it is certainly present. I think, especially with my esteemed colleagues on the phone, we have a wide diversity of opinion about these particular topics. That is to say that many of us are concerned about anti-Semitism on campus. Many of us are concerned about anti-Semitism in left-leaning organizations. And yet, I continue to be more concerned about people who are anti-Semitic and pick up guns and kill Jews. The question of how connected they are is a whole other story, but her article raises these issues pretty seriously. And so those are our choices. I am interested in hearing from all of you which you think might you want to look at more.
I'm interested in both, but I think the article, since for me, it's relevant at this very moment.
It is very immediate, yes. Other thoughts? I promise you, we can look at the article. Linda offers, Linda and Banjo Bob both say the article. I promise you, if we are interested in hearing more from Bari Weiss in the future, we can go from the article back to the book at future times. So, all right, with those voicing an opinion saying, let's look at the article, we will look at the article. So I'm going to share the screen and you will be able to see this is her book, but this is her article. Stop Being Shocked. American liberalism is in danger from a new ideology, one with dangerous implications for Jews. So this is literally a week old, so it is hot off the screen. Can you believe? Perhaps no question has been repeated more times in reaction to more events this year than that one. The most recent outrage in the Jewish community, now several news cycles behind us, came on the Shabbat before Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, when many American Jews seemed dumbfounded by what was, to me, predictable news. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, progressive superstar, had pulled out of an event honoring Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli prime minister assassinated because of his efforts to make peace with the Palestinians. Rabin was, as Bill Clinton said at his funeral, a martyr for his nation's peace. Many Jews were shocked. If Rabin, the symbol of progressive Zionism, is out of bounds, are any Israelis acceptable? What about the 95% of Jews who support the Jewish state? Why would the congresswoman from the Bronx, representing the political party to which upward of 70% of American Jews have been consistently loyal, possibly do such a thing? Now, before we go on, I want to stop and just consider for a moment one of the challenges that we currently face in contemporary society, which is when someone speaks out for a perspective, are they the representative of everyone who thinks that way? And of course, the answer is no, as Larry Sherlock shakes his head. So this is really at the crux of what I would call necessary civic dialogue. In order to have necessary civic dialogue, we need to first and foremost fight fair. I would say in order to have necessary good dialogue in our homes, we need to fight fair. What do I mean by fighting fair? Well, first of all, we need to fight about the issue that's on the table. So the issue on the table here, and let's put it clearly and straightforwardly, there is no reason why anyone should not show up to an event honoring Yitzhak Rabin. If the event is honoring Yitzhak Rabin as a maker of peace, as a figure in Israeli history, as a seeker of a reasonable middle ground Zionism that is both peaceful and secure for the Jewish people on the land of our ancestors in the Middle East that we call Israel, Yitzhak Rabin is as safe a person as we can get. No one should have any historical qualm with Yitzhak Rabin, who is not also having an agenda on some other side of things. What was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's beef with this program? I will put forward quite clearly, if it was with Yitzhak Rabin, she is misguided at best. And I think that's clear. Does Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as a standard bearer for some parts of the new American left, represent a consensus on the new American left? Absolutely not. And this is where we get into the intricacies of what Bari Weiss is bringing us into. Bari Weiss is going to be explicit about the fact that she is bringing us into the Twitterverse of culture. Yeah, Larry.
I just have a question and a comment.
Please.
What is her reason for her opinion to pull out? And she does represent American liberalism or left-wing democratic views, but are we, I guess my comment is, are we concerned about how many followers she will have, what kind of influence she has?
Absolutely. We are concerned about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez not merely as representing a district in the Bronx, but as representing a wide swath of public opinion and being able to sway it. I would say that of the new liberal minority women, she is definitely more influential than Ilhan Omar or some of the other people who have been identified. And therefore, yes, her opinion counts. And yes, if we're going to, again, sort of fight fair, we need to know what we're fighting about.
So what is her rationale?
Well, let's continue the article and we'll see what Bari Weiss presents it on. But part of what I think Judaism brings to these topics is, and what we as Jews need to bring, is the opposite of a knee-jerk reaction. And yes, Rabbi Friedman is correct. It puts us between a rock and a hard place. And that's what Bari Weiss is saying, that American liberalism, and she's going to talk about it, is for all intents and purposes the home of American Jews for a lot of reasons. American liberalism with us, that is America as a liberal democracy, lowercase l, not liberalism as a movement, but the idea of liberal democracy. And that therefore we identify, many of us, with the liberal side of politics. And when the liberal side of politics seems to become, and this is Bari Weiss's argument, necessarily anti-Semitic. Like, in order to participate, there's a litmus test. That is a question. So here she continues, perhaps having previously admitted, this is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that she was not the expert in geopolitics on this issue. She didn't know who Rabin was. That has to be it. Or maybe it was the fault of the Jewish community. Surely if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was introduced to the stable of Haaretz colonists, she'd come around. After all, didn't AOC say she had Sephardic heritage? Did she not realize it was Mandy Patinkin, International Rescue Committee ambassador, who was hosting the event? She must have understood. Surely there must be some confusion, some miscommunication, some mix-up. So obviously this is a straw man. Bari Weiss is attempting to give Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez the benefit of the doubt before she takes any of that doubt away. But it wasn't AOC who was mixed up. The savvy politician had read the room and was sending a clear signal about who belongs in the new progressive coalition and who does not. The confusion, and there seems to be a good deal of it these days, is among American Jews who think that by submitting to ever-changing loyalty tests, they can somehow maintain the old status quo and their place inside of it. Now, this, in my mind, this paragraph illustrates some degree of ignorance of the complexity of the American Jewish political landscape that at least I know of a little bit. So for example, one of the organizations that I have started to support is an organization called Zionists, Z-I-O-N-E-S-S, like lioness only with a Z. And Zionist is desperately and somewhat effectively trying to inject a reasonable American Jewish pro-Israel presence into the American left. That is to say, we get to be pro-civil rights and pro-Israel. We get to be anti-racism and pro-Israel. And I think those are consistent stances. To a certain extent, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is going to say that we cannot, because she is going to entirely attempt to disparage and discredit anti-racism as also non-nuanced at all in any way, shape, or form. So here is her argument. Did you see that the ethical culture Fieldston School hosted a speaker that equated Israelis with Nazis? So Anybody here know what the ethical culture Fieldston School is? Since I went there, I'll explain it a little bit. But yeah, Linda.
I know of it, but since you went there, please speak to it. So,
So
please.
the Ethical Culture Society is a secular society in the primarily in the tri-state area. They founded a number of schools called the Ethical Culture Schools. One of them is on Central Park West between 62nd and 63rd Street. One of them is called Fieldston, which is up in Riverdale in a relatively tame section of the Bronx. And ethical culture was founded by Felix Adler and a bunch of other thinkers who felt that we need to have a formal study of ethics as part of our citizenship. Historically, ethical culture, Felix Adler was Jewish. My grandmother, Ida Sarah Reich, may her memory be for a blessing, was a Jewish supporter of ethical culture. And there's a lot of overlap between ethical culture leaders in the early 20th century and Reform Jewish leaders in the early 20th century as well. So the idea, and let me tell you, Fieldston has a lot of Jews in it. It's one of the top private schools, top private middle and high schools in New York City, and is filled with a bunch of Upper West Side and Borough Park, not Borough Park, Brooklyn Heights Jews, among others. Linda, you were going to say something else? Okay, so the whole idea that ethical culture Fieldston could have hosted a speaker that equated Israelis with Nazis is pretty horrendous. Did you know that Brearley, which is another private school in New York, is now asking families to write a statement demonstrating their commitment to anti-racism? Did you see that Chelsea Handler tweeted a clip of Louis Farrakhan? Did you see that protesters tagged a synagogue in Kenosha with Free Palestine graffiti? That was earlier in some of the Wisconsin stuff. Did you hear about the march in DC where they chanted, "Israel, we know you, you murder children too"? Did you hear that the Biden campaign apologized to Linda Sarsour after initially disavowing her? Linda Sarsour, a Palestinian speaker who was a proponent of the BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement. Did you see that Twitter suspended Brett Weinstein's civic organization, but still allows the Iranian Ayatollah to openly promote genocide of the Jewish people? Did you see that Mayor Bill de Blasio
I would think so. I would think.
The community for the spread of COVID in New York while defending mass protests on the grounds that this is a historic moment of change? Okay, so this last quote, we could deconstruct a lot of them, but this last one, this is rhetoric. This is taking a complicated issue and turning it into one that I think is very simplistic. We have somebody wanting to speak who is under call-in user number 1. What would you like to say?
Yeah, that would be me. I saw this advertised on My Jewish Learning, and so I clicked on, I saw the Zoom, and so I called in, and I'm so happy I did because I love this topic. But I just wanted to ask, where is your shul or your synagogue, and just what denomination are you? Because I don't know anything about you, and I just thought it might help me to follow the conversation better.
Of course, happy to explain. You and a couple of other people are definitely the only people so far that I don't think I know. So I'm Rabbi Jonathan Freirich. I am currently serving as rabbi at Temple Bet Zion in Buffalo, New York. Temple Bet Zion is an historic Reform synagogue. It was founded in 1850, but has been Reformed since 1862. I am a rabbi who grew up in the heart of the Reform movement in Manhattan, at Central Synagogue in Midtown Manhattan. I went to Middlebury College in Vermont, where I encountered Reconstructionism. I went to the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in Philadelphia and have served Reform synagogues since 2003 as an affiliated Reform rabbi as well. So I am a quote unquote bi-rabbi in that I am duly affiliated. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, and thank you so much because I tried to find where you were, and there were so many temples with the same name and didn't have the name of the rabbi, and it just was. I thought I really just need to know where you're coming from, but you know, I had real problems with Barry Weiss in the past. I really did, and I became like I joined listservs for some groups,
Uh-huh.
and when I really started to hear some of the stuff they were saying, I started to change my mind a little bit because yeah, I got on a listserv for Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now and J Street and a lot of, and I thought that they were about just like they wanted to end the occupation like over the Green Line in the West Bank. And then I actually started to, as I started to get more and hear more and more over 2 years' time, I really started to see that this is so much deeper than we realize, and they only say a certain amount on the top, and there's a lot of stuff deeper in. And I really, when I started to really see that, they consider all of Israel occupation, all of it,
Yes.
and that they really want Israel gone, and they use intersectionality against Jews. If you support Israel, then you are a racist.
Yes.
I unsubbed from all of those groups, and I started to pay more attention to Bari Weiss, and I'm starting to think that she may be onto something, and maybe we should pay more attention, and that's why I'm just so grateful that I happened to just drop in to your class without even knowing who you were.
So I agree with you on a lot of counts. Number one, and we can talk about it, any movement that embraces BDS that is also Jewish does not understand that BDS is a front for Hamas. That BDS is a pro-Palestinian platform that is fundamentally against Israel. And that we're going to let Rabbi Nori speak in a moment. So I agree with you. I also agree that Bari Weiss definitely has a point. However, as somebody who's trying desperately to defuse the combative nature of our discourse, I am concerned about the use of divisive rhetoric in defending or putting forward an appeal to call a spade, as it were, in these worlds. So I would rather focus on clarification and coming together in the middle somehow than on, calling people. I still think it's important, for example, to talk to Jewish Voice for Peace, not because I agree with their position, but because if we don't start listening to each other, we're never going to get anywhere. And listening to each other doesn't mean adopting the position. It means understanding that everybody is nuanced, even when we see one another as holding positions that seem to be black and white. All right, which is a longer conversation. Rabbi Nora, you want to offer a comment or a question?
Yeah, I do. Thank you very much for this. I stumbled across it also on Facebook and had a little while to spend, and I appreciate you doing it. And kol hakavod. I don't think that last line is rhetoric, and here's why. I think she is trying to give a number of different examples from a number of different places, different areas within the broader culture, politically and culturally, where the putting the finger on Jews is accepted. And so it has nothing to do with, I think her point is like, this happens in New York City, Jewville, right? I mean, it's like, so it's not just happening out in Montana, it's happening in New York City. I think that's her point. And I accept that as true. So here's my question.
Please. Rabbi, I agree with you 100%. That is to say that, in fact, what is really interesting about the current landscape of anti-Semitism is there is more of it going on in the centers than there is on the periphery. That is, in the place where there are more Jews, there are more targets for anti-Semitism. And also there's more conflation of here's a Jew who does something that we need to change, and therefore we can pick on them, and therefore the hazard of saying therefore all Jews can be picked on as well. So the hasty generalization piece is there. Now your question. Yes.
Her question, her title, "Don't be surprised, don't be shocked,"
Right.
is because people express surprise about that. And, gosh, here in these liberal places, people would be anti-Semitic. I can't believe it, clutch your pearls kind of thing. And I've heard it. Everybody's heard it. That's not a political statement. It's just true. So the question I have is, why do people who are otherwise liberal and who I otherwise agree with express these horrible ideas? And I think I know why. It's a very simple reason. Why does Chelsea Handler do it? Why does AOC do it? Why do these people do it? They do it because it advances them socially in the communities that they prioritize. And I'm sorry to say that is a very serious issue. So AOC is skirting the issues. Saying it's about other things are skirting the issues. If you want to engage them in a real discussion and understand where they're coming from, you have to ask, do you think Zionism is colonialism? Because if you do, and you do not think that Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel, now I understand where you're coming from. And that does advance them in the community that they care about. And the problems are, I just want to make one more point. The problems are not isolated and rare. Not on the right, for sure. Not on the left, for sure. The things on college campuses and schools and essays and things like that, these are not rare and isolated occurrences. They're more and more of a pattern.
Absolutely, so, and 100%. And I think what you just illustrated is how important it is to, as I said at the beginning, to fight fair.
Right. So my question to the liberal Jewish community, or my point, right, which is me, I mean, this is my community. It's the same reason that they say it is the same reason that we hesitate to call it out. And that is, we are concerned about our place and our advancement within the social group that we think is the most important. We don't care whether the right wingers think we're radical liberal Jews. I mean, really, you care if David Duke thinks that about you? No, you care whether or not the community where we want to advance ourselves and which we consider ourselves a part of, how they're going to respond. And our very hesitation proves that they will not respond well to us. I think that's Bari's point. They will not respond well to us standing up and saying those things in this community.
And Rabbi Nori, what's really interesting about your point, which I strongly agree with, is that this means, first of all, number one, all the more so we should be standing up and calling it out,
right,
which Bari Weiss says, and that we should not be accommodating to anti-Semitism. And contrary to what Bari Weiss says, and where I have an argument that in nuance with her, I believe, therefore, we actually have common cause with anti-racism. Because if we are both calling out hatred on the right and the left, in the communities in which we are trying to advance, first of all, we need to understand that assimilating to the community in which we advance, if that assimilation means assimilating to injustice, is not okay. Whether that's injustice to us or injustice to someone else. That is not an available option.
I don't think the group you're talking about sees us as a threatened minority. I think they see us as white.
And what I am going to ask you to do, Rabbi Nori, is to fight fair.
Yeah, I do.
And say, let's talk about individuals and not groups. And
well, okay, fair enough. What I think is even Jews, right? I mean, When Jews Became White, that's a very popular book.
Absolutely.
Within my own community of people. And yet, so if we're to be seen as partners in the anti-racism thing, I think we can talk about how being mistaken for white is a benefit to us,
Yes,
I think we can talk about that. But I think if we talk about ourselves and say we're white,
that's not what I'm advocating.
I think that's a mistake.
That's not what I'm advocating. What I'm advocating is we need to be honest about who we are, which is that I actually have a good amount of privilege because of who I was born. And I don't have to apologize for it. I do have to take responsibility for it, though. I do have to take responsibility for the things that I have access to that might allow me to fight for greater justice, not just for myself, but for everybody. And I would prefer to put forward a culture of responsibility, what I am responsible for, based on what I have access to. And I'm white, I'm Jewish, I'm privileged in many ways. I grew up upper middle class. I was born in a really good hospital on the Lower East Side of Manhattan and got to go to great schools.
I'll do the last thing. I'll chime in. Then I'm going to listen back. Go back to listening. Is I'm privileged for sure, and I'm Jewish for sure, but I ain't white.
I don't think it's a necessary qualification.
All right. That's just my perspective. That's all.
I mean, honestly, I don't think so. And we can talk more about it because I think it's really important to talk about it. And this forum is, I'll give you other opportunities, all of us, to talk about this in different forums because this is important.
Sure.
And Rabbi Friedman, by the way, popped off because he had to go, but he did put a link in the chat. He said that Bari Weiss will be speaking remotely in Sacramento next week, and there is info at mosaiclaw.org. So Banjo Bob asks, Rabbi Nori, where are you located? Rabbi, I forget where you are, Rabbi Nori.
I am in, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm serving now as an interim rabbi for the Chattanooga conservative community.
Great.
But I'm doing that basically remotely, except on occasion going up there. So I live in Atlanta. I had a congregation here for many years, but I've been out of full-time rabbinic work for a number of years.
And Rabbi Nori and I met at Rabbis Without Borders, as did Rabbi Ilan Emanuel, who's also on here as well. So I believe. All right.
RWB.
RWB. Somewhat not yet of blessed memory. Listen, it's been a hell of a year, says Bari Weiss. We all have a lot going on, much of it unnerving and some of it dire. Moreover, many of these stories only surface on places like Twitter. They don't make it into the pages of the New York Times or our friends' Facebook feeds, which is where most Americans get their news from these days. By the way, most Americans do not get their news from the New York Times. Maybe a certain group of American Jews get their news from the New York Times, but most Americans do not. Reporters don't cover these stories adequately, contextualizing them, telling readers which ones are true and which ones aren't, which ones matter or which ones don't. So it makes sense that many smart, well-intentioned people are confused, or rather looking for someone to explain why an emerging movement that purports to advance the ideals they have always supported, fairness, justice, and righting historical wrongs, feels like it's doing the opposite. And this is really our Achilles heel. We want to be part of this movement because it's about our stake in America. And yet, when we are classified as not part of this movement for any number of reasons, for the dual loyalty accusation which has happened, for the fact that we are colonizers, for the simplification of the intersectionality argument, which is a horrendous simplification because intersectionality is actually an interesting thing academically and a horrifically misused term colloquially. So all of this stuff is rough for us because, again, it's not exactly an easy time to spend time sorting through what's actual and what's not. And then, of course, she continues, there is also the X factor of Donald Trump, which is impossible to overstate. Understandable hostility toward him has prevented many Jews from seeing the problem on the other side. To even look away from the obscenity in the White House for a moment strikes many, as they have told me, as irresponsible or besides the point. And let's put it beyond that. There are Jews who are pro-Donald Trump. And parsing out form of Jew hatred, what form of anti-Semitism we need to be most concerned about at any given time is difficult. I share with the majority of American Jews disgust toward Trump and Trumpism, which has normalized bigotry and cruelty in ways that have crippled American society. The truth doesn't detract, that truth doesn't detract from another. There is another danger, this one from the left. And unlike Trump, this one has attained cultural dominance, capturing America's elites and our most powerful institutions. In the event of a Biden victory, it is hard to imagine it meeting resistance. So let me make my purpose perfectly clear. I am here to ring the alarm. I'm here to say, do not be shocked anymore. Stop saying, can you believe? It's time to accept reality if we want to have any hope of fixing it. So now she's going to do some history, which I think is relatively interesting. To understand the enormity of the change we are now living through, take a moment to understand America as the overwhelming majority of its Jews believed it was, and perhaps as we always assumed it would be. It was liberal. Not liberal in the narrow partisan sense, but liberal in the most capacious and distinctly American sense of that word. The belief that everyone is equal because everyone is created in the image of God. The belief in the sacredness of the individual over the group or the tribe. The belief that the rule of law and equality under that law is the foundation of a free society. The belief that due process and the presumption of innocence are good and that mob violence is bad. The belief that pluralism is a source of our strength, that tolerance is a reason for pride, and that liberty of thought, faith, and speech are the bedrocks of democracy. From a Jewish perspective, if I were giving this talk right now, I would probably stereotypically bring the correspondence between George Washington and the synagogue in Providence in the 1770s, prior to the American Revolution, where George Washington reassures and assures a Jewish congregation in Providence, Rhode Island, the centrality of pluralism and freedom of religion and the celebration of that diversity in the America that he envisions. We could then, if we were doing an American history jumping off point, go to the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution and point out the evolution of America from the protection of property rights to the protection of civil rights and the protection of Americans who happen to be white and male to Americans who could be more than that, and see the evolution of our rights. We could also point out that at that time of upheaval, Jews were really worried that we would not receive those protections. So there's a lot going on here. The liberal worldview was one that recognized that there were things, indeed the most important things in life, that were located outside the realm of politics. Friendship, art, music, family, love. This was a world in which Antonin Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg could be close friends, because as Scalia once said, some things are more important than votes. Crucially, this liberalism relied on the view that the Enlightenment tools of reason and the scientific method might have been designed by dead white guys, but they belonged to everyone, and they were the best tools for human progress that have ever been devised. Racism was evil because it contradicted the foundations of this worldview, since it judged people not based on the content of their character, but on the color of their skin. And while America's founders were guilty of undeniable hypocrisy, their own moral failings did not invalidate their transformational project. The founding documents were not evil to the core, but magnificent, as Martin Luther King Jr. put it, because they were, quote, a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir, unquote. In other words, the founders themselves planted the seeds of slavery's destruction, and our second founding fathers, abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, made it so. America would never be perfect, but we could always strive toward building a more perfect union. I didn't even know that this worldview had a name because it was baked into everything I came into contact with. My parents' worldviews, the schools they sent me to, the synagogues we attended, the magazines and newspapers we read, and so on. It was among the many millions of Americans cosseted by these ideals. I was among the many millions of Americans cosseted by these ideals. Since World War II, American intellectual and cultural life had been produced and protected by a set of institutions: universities, newspapers, magazines, record companies, professional organizations, labor unions, cultural venues, publishing houses, Hollywood studios, think tanks, historical museums, art museums that aligned broadly with those principles. As such, they had incredible power, power that demanded our respect because they held up the liberal order. No longer. American liberalism is under siege. There is a new ideology vying to replace it. So this is a very interesting perspective, and I am struggling as somebody who wants to hear about it. I want to hear opinions that I disagree with. And I've been doing a lot of reading on this new ideology, as she calls it, only I wouldn't call it an ideology, I'd call it an analysis. And therein we see perhaps the differences here. By claiming there is an ideology, a unified consensus-built ideology, a them, we have an enemy. And I am always cautious about claiming that somebody is part of a them again that we would be opposed to. No one has yet decided on the name for the force that has come to unseat liberalism. Some say it's social justice. The author Rod Dreher has called it therapeutic totalitarianism. The writer Wesley Yang refers to it as the successor ideology, as in the successor to liberalism. At some point, it will have a formal name, one that properly describes its mixture of postmodernism, postcolonialism, identity politics, neo-Marxism, critical race theory, intersectionality, and the therapeutic mentality. Until then, it is up to each of us to see it plainly. We need to look past the hashtags and slogans and the jargon to assess it honestly, and then to explain it to others. The new creed's premise goes something like this. We are in a war in which the forces of justice and progress are arrayed against the forces of backwardness and oppression. And in a war, the normal rules of the game, due process, political compromise, the presumption of innocence, free speech, even reason itself, must be suspended. Indeed, those rules themselves were corrupt to begin with, designed as they were by dead white males in order to uphold their own power. I disagree with this premise. I don't think anyone is saying this explicitly as an ideology, but maybe I just haven't heard it. I'm skeptical to start with, and I admit that. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, as the writer Audre Lorde put it, and the master's house must be dismantled because the house is rotted at its foundation. The beating heart of this new ideology is critical race theory. The legal scholar Angela Harris put it concisely in her foreword to Critical Race Theory on Introduction. Unlike traditional civil rights discourse, which stresses incrementalism and step-by-step progress, critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. Critical race theory says there is no such thing as neutrality, not even in the law, which is why the very notion of color blindness, the Kingian dream of judging people not based on the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, must itself be deemed racist. Racism is no longer about individual discrimination. It is about systems that allow for disparate outcomes among racial groups. If everyone doesn't finish the race at the same time, then the course must have been flawed and should be dismantled. This is crucial in this criticism. And it is concerning. It is concerning because she is using terms from the established ideas of anti-racists and turning them on their head. Colorblindness, as mentioned by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his I Have a Dream speech, judging people not based on their color of their skin, but by their content of their character, is a dream. It's not a policy. And this applied to policy has been applied in a way to create differential outcomes that are race-based. What do I mean by this? I mean that the histories that she's attacking or the analysis that she's attacking very strongly lay out the case that racism continues to morph in its application, that no one can get away with saying, I am a racist today, or this is a racist idea, and put it forward as policy. However, we can say that this policy treats everybody equally. And even if it doesn't, even if it's designed not to, but as long as it doesn't mention race, thanks, Rabbi Nori, nice to see you. If it doesn't mention race, then the Supreme Court has said, by virtue of the fact that it mentions no race, even if it has fundamentally different outcomes on people based on their race, it is not racist. For example, voting rights. The Supreme Court decided that the Voting Rights Act could no longer be applied to most of the states that had been in violation of the Voting Rights Act for decades. Why? Because those states no longer explicitly said people of color were not allowed to vote in certain ways. They did, however, pursue policies that were targeted at people of color based on percentages. So people who don't have picture IDs in North Carolina, the majority of those people are African American. So when one says one needs a picture ID in order to vote, one has come up with a quote unquote colorblind policy that allows the state of North Carolina to prevent more African Americans from voting than white people from voting. It disproportionately impacts African Americans. Is it a racist policy? Yes, because it was designed that way. But the Supreme Court said, no, it doesn't matter. Similarly, she also conflates two things. The question is not if everyone doesn't finish the race at the same time, but if everyone is starting the race with different advantages. We understand that in our America that celebrates individual achievement, two people given the same resources at the same time will end up with two very different outcomes. It is a fundamentally false premise to say that two people, one white and one African American, in similar situations at this time will have similar opportunities and therefore the opportunity for similar outcomes. That is not true under any circumstances. Somebody born in the same circumstances of me who happened to be Black does not have the same opportunities or the same outcomes as I do. First and foremost, they have different family inherited wealth. Because my family had access to the GI Bill in the 1950s and their family did not. Period, end of story. So that means that my family got a government aid handout because we were not African American, not because we were white, but because we were not African American. And this is part of the issue with regard to Rabbi Nori's distinction. I don't care that I'm white or not. The issue is I got certain benefits and some people didn't. And the differential was race. Does that mean we need to figure out a way to help somebody who didn't get those benefits get exactly equal outcomes to me now? Of course not. But it does mean we need to compensate that person in a way that differently from a governmental policy level than we do now. And she is ignoring the whole nuance of this in her analysis. Similarly, in the next paragraph, thus the efforts to do away with the SAT or the admissions test for elite public schools like Stuyvesant and Lowell for decades, the engines of American meritocracy that allowed children of poor and working class families to advance on their merits regardless of race, or the argument made recently by the New York Times classical music critic to do away with blind auditions for orchestras. Okay, so the SAT, if one wants to look at the history of the SAT is derived from the IQ test, which was derived from a group of people deliberately designing a test to prove that whites were smarter than blacks. This is not an outcome of happenstance. This is on purpose. The initial framers of the IQ test set out to prove that white people were smarter than black people. That is the purpose of the test. The SAT is derived from that test, from the same people and the same companies who put it together. And we have differential outcomes in the results of that test on purpose, which is why elite public colleges are doing away with the SAT as a metric for admitting students. Now, turns out I also went to Stuyvesant, so I know a little bit about this. And boy, can I tell you that Stuyvesant alumni, Stuyvesant is a magnet school in New York City. It is a, wow, and we have Rabbi Person on the call too. That is awesome. I'm so thrilled to see some of my wonderful close colleagues showing up. Stuyvesant High School, magnet school in New York City. Where did is there any place I didn't go? Says Banjo Bob. Yes, I didn't go to an Ivy League college. But in elite schools in New York City, I went to a couple. So I'm in Bari Weiss's world. Stuyvesant High School is the science and math public school in Stuyvesant and in New York City. And it has a very difficult merit test to get in. And it is very clear that the only way to get in is to score high on that test. As a Stuyvesant grad, I am very ashamed of the fact that the current makeup of Stuyvesant High School had 6 African-American students in it. 6 out of 2,500. That is not okay under any circumstances. However, who does well on that test is quite clearly based on who has access, for the most part, to test preparation classes. And the school district of New York City is the largest school district in the country, and it is the most segregated. So the differential in outcomes is clear. Does that mean that African-American students are too unintelligent to succeed at Stuyvesant? Of course not. It means that the test is measuring who has been better prepared to get into Stuyvesant. So that Stuyvesant now has something like 80% Asian American students. When I was there, the division was 35% Jewish, 40% Asian American, 20% African American, or something like that. It was diverse, but it still wasn't representative. We will never get to equal representation exactly, but we might get to more equal representation if we attend to underlying causes. The major underlying cause in the school district of New York City, is that the public schools in New York City are inherently unequal. That some of those schools are better than others. And that the schools that are better than others overwhelmingly serve privileged students of a variety of ways, and the schools that are less good than others overwhelmingly serve specific minorities. It's a complicated problem, and no one reasonable has said the way to do away from it, for the way to solve it is to just do away with the test. Right? It's the problem with Stuyvesant is a symptom of the fundamental inequality of New York City public schools. Is it all about the money? Yes, it is always all about the money, but it's also all about effort. Good education is not rocket science, but it does require effort to be put into smaller classrooms, smaller classes with good teachers and more individualized student attention. And it turns out that's hard to do. It also requires cultural sensitivity to students who are coming from different backgrounds. So different students who express themselves differently still get individualized attention. It is hard work. A good school is not, at this point, is miraculous because the chemistry of putting together all the effort and the money is really difficult. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't be pursuing it for everybody. In fact, any feature of human existence that creates disparity of outcome must be eradicated. The nuclear family, politeness, even rationality itself can be defined as inherently racist or evidence of white supremacy, as a Smithsonian institution suggested this summer. The KIPP charter schools recently eliminated the phrase work hard from its famous motto, work hard, be nice, because the idea of working hard supports the illusion of meritocracy. This sounds awful. So I have to agree with that. That's terrible. Denise Young Smith, one of the first Black people to reach Apple's executive team, left her job in the wake of asserting that skin color wasn't the only legitimate marker of diversity. The victim of a diversity culture that, as writer Zaid Jilani has noted, is spreading across the entire corporate world and is enforced by a highly educated activist class. So again, if we're looking for examples of bad behavior, there are plenty of them. Do they indict the entirety of everyone supporting a particular perspective? I don't think so. Again, I'm gonna, beat my drum of fighting fair. And now she's taking on a hero of mine. So now I'm in trouble because my bias is here. The most powerful exponent of this worldview is Ibram X. Kendi. His book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is on the top of every bestseller list. His photograph graces GQ. He is on Time's Most Influential People of the Year, and his outfit at Boston University was recently awarded $10 million from Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey. According to Kendi, we are all either racist or anti-racist. To be a good person and not a bad person, we must be anti-racist. There is no neutrality, no such thing as not racist. Indeed, Kendi wants to ban those words from the dictionary. So this is a fundamentally poor misreading of Ibram Kendi. So I wish to explain this to you, and then we're going to come back to this another time because we're hitting our stopping point. Ibram Kendi says all of us at any given time are either being racist or anti-racist. That the reason he says we should never say someone is not racist or someone is racist is because we are not racist or racist as a person. I am not an anti-racist person. I am a person who occasionally advocates for anti-racism and occasionally allows racism to persist around me. He says this in the opening of his book, where he self-critiques as saying, I have participated in racism. He has gotten in trouble from African Americans, because he is an African American author, for saying that Black people can be racist. So this is a blatantly misreading critique. And that doesn't mean we have to discount the rest of what she has to say about Ibram Kendi. I think it's important that we figure it out, because I think it's important that we understand that we have one person arguing with another person's perspective without the other person here to represent it. And anytime we do that, we run into trouble. Holly says, elite schools support elite students who then reinforce the elite schools and then crow about their successes. It is the schools who successfully educate the challenged. They deserve the kudos, but they always struggle. It is a circle of success or failure. Absolutely. That is for sure the case. And as both a student who went to a lot of schools and a parent who has parented students at lots of schools, there is a self-reinforcing mechanism here. I can say, though, that schools that call themselves elite, that don't have elite outcomes for their students, trouble me more than schools that call themselves elite and actually create thoughtful, caring students. And that there's a difference between the two. That we need to, again, dig deep. And here, where Ibram Kendi says there is no such thing as neutrality, what he is trying to say is, again, what I just said. At any given moment, I am either, among the many things I might be doing, accepting of a system that probably benefits me at the expense of others, or working to reform a system that benefits me at the expense of others. Now, this is a challenge because it means I have to take on my responsibility in a system that probably does me better than not. And my responsibility in that system is to make it better for others as well as for me. And this means that some people feel like what we are being asked to do is sacrifice my own achievements for the sake of other people. And I would say that what we are being asked to do is try to figure out a way to more equitably, more responsibly figure out how to create a society that provides equal opportunities to everyone. I will point out that we are stuck in a debate here that has those of us who are not at the top debating a system that really truly only benefits the top 1 or 2 or 3 or 4%. And that as long as we are arguing among each other, we are not attempting to create something better. Because as we've seen over the course of the last 50 years, our American system has tended to benefit the very few at the expense of everybody else. That there used to be good middle class, upper middle class jobs with job security on which one could retire. And then United Airlines declared bankruptcy how many times between 1991 and 2005? Who paid for their bankruptcies? Not their banks.
We did.
Their employees.
Oh, your employee.
Their employees paid for it because they lost pension funds, they lost rights to pension funds, they lost health insurance in retirement, they lost any number of things because the changes in regulations in the 1980s allowed companies to declare bankruptcy and pay off their creditors first at the expense of their employees and their pensioners. We are all in this together. I think we have a lot to be careful of. I think we are running into dangerous times on issues of anti-Semitism. But I think the upshot of this is I think we run into even greater hazard if we think that dividing and conquering among those of us who might be fighting for the same justice together is going to help. All right, to be continued. Thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing all of you soon. Holly said something, I know this is off topic, but one issue that disturbs me greatly is the folks on Jewish right-wing Trump supporting community who call liberal-leaning Democratic Jews as self-hating and not really Jewish. Well, this is truly one of the problems that we face in Judaism is anyone claiming anybody else is less authentically Jewish. It is a poison within the Jewish community. We need to say, hey, I'm Jewish, I get to think what I want, because after all, that makes me Jewish. And there should be no ideological test of purity in Judaism. Because that doesn't fuel anything except division. Thank you, everybody. Truly, it's really nice to see all of you, and send me questions offline, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.